Finding the beauty in myself, it took a long time. I knew it as a baby. You could see it in my eyes, or these pictures of me where I am just overjoyed and exuberant with life. But I think when you turn to the pictures of me later as an adolescent, you don't see that same spark. Mostly, I don't think I thought there was room for it and the disease of alcoholism that lived in our house, or so I thought as a child. Alcoholism and addiction, it's a family disease. There's a picture in some of the 12-step books where the person who is abusing the substances, it pours into their body, but then it extends through all of the relationships of all the people they're with. It can be so infuriating, this disease. It can also be so freeing to recognize that it is a disease. We wouldn't try to control diabetes in another person. We wouldn't yell at them, if you loved me, you wouldn't have it anymore. Just stop it. We wouldn't think that we caused their diabetes, and we wouldn't think that we could cure it. And so it goes with alcohol and drugs. We didn't cause the addiction, we can't control it, and we can't cure it. But that's not what I thought growing up. I made sense of the things in my family the way that most children do, with magical thinking. If only I'm a good girl, if only I set the kitchen table just right, if only I don't spill my milk, if only I tell them good things about what happened at school today, if only, then the arguing wouldn't start. The fact that I never succeeded by being good enough didn't seem to stop me. I just knew that there had to be something I could do better, as if it was about me, and as if that kind of power even exists in the world. But I concluded, like many who live with alcoholics or addicts, that it must be me who's not good enough, that there must be something about me that makes this keep happening. I concluded, without really even knowing it as a kid, that I thought there was something wrong with me. So for me to even begin to see the beauty in myself, that was not an easy road. That took the surfacing of an excruciating amount of pain, of no longer repressing and denying the stories and the experiences that I had lived through, but that my 22-year-old body couldn't no longer hold those stories down, and they just broke through me, and it made me ask for help. For me, it was like the Rumi quote at the beginning of the poem, where he said, you have to keep breaking your heart open. No, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. That's not easy, letting your heart break over and over again. Finding the beauty for me took a lot of different strategies and work. It took a lot of writing, stacks of journals. It took attending poetry writing workshops, entire weekend workshops on shame or meditation. Yes, I paid the little money I had to go to a workshop on shame. You're desperate when you do that, right? It took being in a women's circle. It took being in a survivor group at a rape crisis center. It took throwing all kinds of rocks in the rivers in Vermont. And it took my share of pillow punching. And if you have anger that you need to get out, I highly recommend this, by the way. You take a piece of paper and you write on it whatever you need to write, and you stick it inside that pillow, so when you hit it, it makes a really good sound. It's very satisfying. It took hours and hours and years for me moving on a dance floor in my moving meditation practice to let go of my tendency to disassociate from my body, to climb back into the body, my body, that had survived trauma and violence that goes hand in hand with the disease of alcoholism or addiction. It took allowing on that dance floor and my movement for all of those excruciating, extraordinarily large feelings that I couldn't handle as a child to come out of my body to be seen. And it took a lot of other people being on the dance floor who were doing similarly strange movements. Like one of my teachers says, dance ugly and drool. It's not about looking good. It's about seeing what wants to move through you. And it took a lot of people showing me how to do that and doing it around me without judgment for me to be willing to keep meeting my own edge. And it didn't hurt that more than half of them, I think, were therapists. That was very helpful. It took a lot of appointments with my own therapist. It took a lot of messy appointments. Times where when I would leave her office, I was like looking at her like, really, you're gonna let me leave when I'm feeling like this? How dare you let me go? And it took years of her doing that for me to trust that I was actually okay, that I would make it till the next week, that my feelings aren't facts, that they aren't the end of the story, that there's more to me than just the emotional storm that comes passing through. It took for me going to an Al-Anon meeting for friends and families of alcoholics to learn that I wasn't the only one who felt and thought and experienced what I had been through. And then it took going back and going back and going back and going back, and I've been going back for 18 years. For me, the Latin origins of the word perseverance, through or by the means of very bad intents or harsh, that was my reality. I couldn't keep living the way I was living. I knew something had to give, something had to change, and the only thing that could be was me. So to speed things up, or so I thought. I remember when I first went to Al-Anon, the people who'd been there for 18 years, I thought like, what is wrong with you? I'm a really good student. I'm gonna get this done in like 4 months, and I'm out of here, no more of this stuff. As if all of those years of filling myself with this overdeveloped sense of responsibility could just poof, be gone by naming it. As if I didn't have to practice something else. But when I was 24, I was very uncomfortable with all of this healing work going on in my life. So to speed things up, I decided I'm going on a 10-day solo wilderness backpacking trip. And I am going to not bring any books or entertainment, and I'm going to meet myself and finally know who am I outside of society and relationships, because I want to sit at the fire and I want to enjoy my company in the empty moments. I was tired of running. I wanted to know, like, what is going on here? What is eating my life? So that I can let it out and move on. I'm grateful that the month before I went on this trip, that I was invited and actually attended a weekend rite of passage, an initiation into adulthood for like 5 high school girls in a local Vermont community. We were up camping in the mountains in northeast Vermont, and I showed up at this thing. I can't believe I went. I only knew one person, but I just knew there was something for me there. And it was there that I met my first and only shaman. His name is Martin Prechtel, and he's a Mayan shaman from Guatemala. And I didn't really know what this was all about until he started talking. And he said things like this, which I later found in a talk that he offered at the men's conference in Minnesota with Robert Bly. And his talk was called Grief and Praise. And he said this: I notice people who feel real bad about themselves in middle age, nobody has really praised them for something worthy when they were like this tall. May have been praised for something, but not for something worthy. And I noticed there are these people who can't weep properly for the dead. And when I say they couldn't weep properly, I don't mean like there's a right and a wrong. I mean properly like you look bad when you're done. And I thought, why is this? People who couldn't praise, people who couldn't grieve. It was really hard for them, and it wasn't their fault. In Mayan culture, praise and grief, they're just the same thing. Somebody dies, a loved one goes somewhere else, or like me, your whole country is ripped out from underneath you, and you grieve. What is grief? It's a form of praise of life. Because it means you miss it. You miss the damn thing. You have to do that, because otherwise it means you don't love the thing you lost. And you've got to love the thing you lost, because if you don't grieve it, it means that it was never really alive. So why are they all running around not grieving? Why is it so uncool to praise? And he said, because of trust. When there is no village who you can see to trust seeing you in that irrational state, who's going to pull you out of the water? You could get lost in there. Grief is not depression. Depression is the inability to grieve. He says if you have 2 centuries of people who never properly grieved, where does that grief go? What happens to all that grief? It becomes ghosts living in the grandchildren. I knew what he was talking about. I loved hearing this possibility that maybe the shame, the anger, the grief that I had been feeling wasn't all of my own. Perhaps it was the generations of the alcoholic disease that was in my family that maybe now was plopped onto my lap. And so I didn't know what all this stuff he was talking about was about, but it kept me listening. He said, if you're a man who says something like this, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. If you're saying this, then you're one of the men who doesn't know how to grieve, and you're holding like 5 generations of unexpressed grief in your body. When we do this flat thing, this I don't feel anything at all thing, then we don't grieve and we don't praise. He said there's a third thing that we live for. We've got the spirits, we've got us in this world, and then we've got this third thing called life. And it started before us, and it carries us, and it's going to continue way beyond us. And the best you can do is leave your fragrance in the air so that what follows you is inspired. We can feed the spirits, and they take care of us, and then life keeps going. And you know how we feed the spirits? They eat beauty. Grief is a part of that beauty. Praise is a part of that beauty. It's holy work. It's not weak. We don't persevere by gritting our teeth and bearing through it and just hoping that those things are going to go away in our life. No, it's like being like the tree. It's allowing, it's accepting life as it is. Oh my God, what a different way. He told us that the girls being initiated that night were staying in their own site for the weekend, and that night they were fasting, and they would stay awake all night and go into a sweat lodge. And while they were inside their sweat lodge, we were invited to be their community, to come and sing to them throughout the night, to keep them tethered to this world. He said they were going to be diving down into the underworld. I don't really know of what, of their psyches, of their fears, of their ancestry, of the spirit world, but they were diving down into themselves, stripping away as many social norms as they could to see who they were when everything else fell away. This was their rite of passage into adulthood. It helped strengthen and shape my own that I was planning for the next month. So that night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I walked in the damp, chill grass, hearing voices in the distance, singing to these girls. And I went and joined them. And we sang for hours through sleepiness, through strained vocal cords. It took for me hearing off-key voices that were like reaching to create harmony with the people who could really sing, for me to free myself up to do the same, to find and give my voice into this community. Much more happened on that weekend that I was so fortunate to be able to attend. And then on my solo trip in the woods that I can't and don't really want to fully explain. But I do want to share this. That I took from their example that I too would hike in and set up a camp away from any site where other people might be, to just be me in the woods. And that for the first 3 days I would leave my site in one place so I wasn't doing the busy work of, if you've been backpacking, there's just endless, like packing things in Ziploc bags and in and out and tents and everything. And I decided that for those first 3 days I would stay in one place and that I would fast. Also, so that I wasn't spending all of my time. Have you ever been backpacking? Do you know the etiquette of cleaning up food and trying to disperse it? Do you know what it's like being in bear country and you tie your food up and you throw it over branches so that it hangs suspended from two trunks like 10 feet out in the middle to dissuade the bears from stealing it? Yes, I see some nods. Yeah, that takes time, doesn't it? I didn't want to spend all of that time doing all of these things when I was really wanting to go to find out, like, what demons are going to come sit at my fire and try to feast on my life. I predicted that all of this anger and grief and shame that had been eating me was going to show up and just like rip me open. But that didn't happen. Something entirely different happened for me in the woods. Yes, I got really scared every night, and I wrote myself a permission slip to leave in the morning, and then in the morning I'd say, what would you do at home? But what else showed up for me was that when everything else fell away, I was really playful. I laughed a lot. I really enjoyed the trees like laughing at me, trying to throw my food, the bags to get out, because I'm a horrible aim, and I just thought, wow, the woods are getting a real kick out of watching me try to do this. And what I could finally see was that the story that I had put at my core, the story that wasn't working for me, that needed to be cut down, that needed to stop being nourished, was this story I told myself that there was something wrong with me, and that's why so many hard things had befallen me as a child. It was this story of shame, the idea that, not that I've done something wrong, but that who I am is just wrong. And that was in my core. And it was so tightly bound in there in all of the years I had practiced that way of surviving as a kid that I couldn't even see it was there. But somehow making this space in my life, I thought it would just like show up and eat me alive, but it didn't. I could like pull back just enough that I could see it. And I realized like that's not my core. That's just a story I've been telling myself. And it's been stuck here for so long because it's a stubborn set of feelings. Because I had treated them in a stubborn way. I had been so scared to feel it and to look at it that I kept pushing it away and pushing it away. And when I finally just allowed that storm to surface and do its thing, it was ready to move along. But many times in my life, I called that storm back because who was I if I didn't have that core? Who would I be? That was so uncomfortable. And so I would call it back and I would cling to it so that I wouldn't hope too much, so that I wouldn't risk too much, so that I wouldn't trust people too much, that I could feel some control in my life. But it wasn't working for me anymore. So alone in the trees, I came to see that when all else falls away, including the stories I tell myself about myself, a truth that I could no longer deny is what kept me company. The strength and the beauty of the mountain and the river, persevering and rushing with life, is also in the strength and the beauty of our persistent heartbeats, of our breath, our inescapable and sacred belonging in life. Wow. It took a lot. It still takes a lot. It's not like I've done that work and now that's all done and I'm good to go, right? It takes many things for me to recognize and claim the beauty that is the birthright of our being alive, simply as being human. That's good work. It took many people sharing similar experiences and listening to mine for me to see that there is beauty in that imperfect strength. And that if I thought that about them, then maybe they thought that about me too. And it took me being alone with myself in the woods longer than I had ever been alone before for me to realize, yes, that is true. The tree's survival necessitated that it let go of what was no longer working and it needed help to make that happen. The tree's survival necessitated that it allowed its energy to sprout in new directions. Life sometimes calls us, whether you think about yourself, to see if what you think about yourself or others is actually true. It invites you to look with curiosity anew at the things that you've assumed your whole life are true, and invites us to choose to stop feeding them before you even know if anything else is going to grow in its place. Sometimes we have to trust that something worthwhile and life-giving will emerge. Sometimes it takes choosing not to be ugly. Sometimes it takes choosing not just to persevere, this human definition of perseverance, by gritting our teeth and bearing it and pushing through until, damn it, everything turns out the way we want it to. It takes listening to this teaching of nature to just be, to accept life as it is, and to choose life as it is, to allow life to live and move in us, to adapt us and grow. It takes choosing to persevere, not in spite of life, but with it. Amen.